acupuncturist, Chinese medicine practitioner, and Ayurveda educator whose private practice is an integration of Chinese and Ayurvedic medicine and is right around the corner from here. She writes and teaches workshops on Ayurveda, energy medicine, and healthy breathing. Please join me in welcoming her to the Northshire.
Good? Yeah. I feel like I want to move my feet back. Okay, that's good. So hi everybody, thank you for coming. I'm so happy to be able to celebrate the release of my first book here at Northshire Bookstore. For so many years before Northshire was in Saratoga, I would make a special trip out to Manchester to the store there, and I think many of you have probably done the same, just for the ambiance and to get the feeling of a hometown, small bookstore. And so we're really lucky to have this here in Saratoga. So I'm here to talk about the book, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the people who really helped support me in the process of writing the book, because unfortunately the acknowledgements didn't make it into the front this time around. So I'm not going to go through everyone, but I do want to acknowledge my life partner Nathan Solomon, whose birthday is today. He's The book was written pretty much entirely during my first pregnancy and the year following, while I exclusively breastfed my daughter. So not only did he put up with my hormonal shifts from that, but with the stress of deadlines and edits, he didn't just put up with me, he actually supported me, and I'll always be grateful to him for that. And then of course, I want to thank my parents, because they always supported me in my sort of off the beaten path interests and pursuits. And I don't even think I'll know how much they did until my daughter's a little bit older, but I wanted to give a shout out to them as well. The entire staff at Inner Traditions Parent Company, the publisher of the book, was amazing. Such a sweet staff, very friendly and helpful. John Graham, the acquisitions editor, was very encouraging to me in the beginning of this process. Joe Kulin, my literary agent and friend, was also very encouraging. And there's actually an interesting story to how the book process itself began. A friend of mine is a Tibetan monk who has done an autobiography and some children's coloring books. And I kind of went along for the ride on a trip up to Inner Traditions in Vermont several years ago while he was speaking to the acquisitions team at IT. And it was interesting because we got to tour the whole facility and meet all the staff and see all the books. It was really amazing. And we went out to lunch with John, the acquisitions editor, and while we were there, Joe was like, why don't you tell John about your idea? So I did. I had this idea to synthesize the commonalities between Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. There are a few books on the market that have kind of the basics of each in the book, but it's very basic, and I felt as though there should be something a little bit more thorough on the market. So when I pitched this idea to John, he was all for it, because being in the business, he knew there wasn't really anything like that. So they prodded me and encouraged me through those couple of years to keep pushing along with it, and I did. And the book is, it's really a culmination of, I feel, my entire life, in a sense. It's not an autobiography, and it's not it might not be the narrative that some people would put out there as representative of who they are. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily representative of who I am, but it's a culmination of everything I've done, and a lot of those things, even in the past few days, thinking about what I'd speak about here tonight, started to make sense to me. I started making connections between sort of the light bulbs that have gone off my whole life, even as a child, things I was drawn to, the paper lantern in the Chinese restaurant as a toddler. The first time I heard about the Ganges in India and it being a holy river. My mother's incense burner that is a statue of Buddha that I still have today. Learning about reincarnation and various things along the way, and then developing into a very vivid dreamer. I always had vivid dreams, and it seemed like it wasn't sort of the normal thing. So I became very interested in learning about dream interpretation. So I started researching that back in junior high school. And then fast forward to my college years, and I ended up in a study abroad program through St. Rose that went to Greece. And we traveled to the temple of Asclepius in Old Epidaurus. And at that trip, I learned that people would actually go to a place and they would receive healing. They would go through the medicine at the time to cure what ailed them, and if it didn't work, much like people do today with Western medicine, they resorted to these healing temples. And at the temple of Asclepius, you would go, you would have a catharsis, you would see a comedy and a tragedy, you would stir everything up inside, you would be treated with the healing waters, you would receive massages, and then when the temple priest or priestess deemed you ready, you would enter the temple for sleeping at night. And during the sleeping process, they have these stelae of workers in the temple at night doing what looks like energy healing over the people that are asleep and helping them to process the messages that they're receiving in their dreams. And of course that resonated with me, and I was like, wow, I have to find more out about this. I come home, I start working at Kay's Jewelry Boutique on Broadway, and a friend of mine was sitting on the front shelf with one of the other workers with her hands over the gal's head because she had chronic migraines. And when she did this, even without her medication, her headaches would go away. And I was fascinated. And that's when I started learning Reiki. That was back in about 1995. And from there, I trained in Reiki, I trained in transpersonal counseling with one of the people that started the transpersonal training program at UC Berkeley, Marcia Dale Lopez. I just kind of kept dabbling in all this stuff, and I got into yoga, and I was teaching yoga and meditation and energy work, and I had been a co-owner of a yoga studio right here in Saratoga on Philo Street. And I was really interested in going a little deeper with my practice. And what I wanted to do in my practice wasn't necessarily the direction I saw mainstream yoga going in. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to support myself long term doing that. So I went to Chinese medicine school. I went out to Seattle because I wanted to have a practice that I could use to support myself in the healing arts, still in the mystical realm of life, but also very grounded in societal recognition. And so I got my degree in acupuncture and oriental medicine, and that includes, of course, acupuncture. Acupuncture is a branch of oriental medicine. And acupuncture is very recognized today, and it's accepted by insurance, and so many people are helped with it. So many people are helped with pain conditions and just things that you don't normally receive relief-wise in the standard everyday modalities that we would normally experience. So I feel like there's sort of a consciousness shift in our society, at least, toward exploring more about who we are, not just as a physical body and three-dimensional reality, but as a spirit, as a consciousness, as a soul. And the thing that I love about Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, Ayurveda being the wisdom of life, that's the translation of the word Ayurveda, and it's the equivalent basically of Chinese medicine in China. It's Indian medicine in India, Ayurveda. The thing I love the most about both of those medicines is that they are complete models, complete paradigms that represent every dimension of what we are as a living being in this body. So both of these systems talk about the physical body. They talk about our chi or our prana, which is the life force energy, and many other things. They talk about the 5 elements, which are the building blocks of matter. They talk about our wisdom bodies. They talk about our mind and our emotional body. And they talk about something that transcends the body when we leave it. They both do this, and they both have different words for it. They both have different lenses through which they perceive it. But the fact that they both have it made me want to investigate more what that was all about. So I did. And I did a lot of thought experiments, and I went to a lot of workshops, and I wrote a lot of journaling to help myself figure out what are these two things really saying? What are they saying that's the same? And what are they saying in a way that isn't so foreign to us? What are they saying in a way that's practical for our everyday modern lives? And so that's what this book is. It's kind of a culmination of all of that research and internal study and working with the wonderful people that I get to work with on a regular basis, who I enjoy seeing walk through the door in my practice, and putting it down on paper. So when I went to Chinese medicine school, I found that in the school I went to, we had to learn to translate both simplified and traditional Chinese characters. And we had to learn to read some of the ancient texts ourselves. That was torture. 6 months later, I could barely recognize a character, and my eyes are bad. But anyway, I got through it. And what I found was that the books that had information about Chinese medicine and the sources that they were translating were saying things that we weren't finding in our kind of rudimentary grassroots translation at school. And it made me realize how open to interpretation it all really is. And it also makes it really difficult to apply the theory to your own life. If you don't know what the heck it says, like, you need to know the cultural context, what century it was in, what was happening in China at the time, to even understand what the character meant. So when I looked into Ayurveda a bit more, having the background in yoga, I loved Ayurveda naturally. I found that there was a lot more explanation, and I went to India and I studied a little Sanskrit and I did some translating of like the Yoga Sutras and stuff like that. And I found that I was able to actually understand what the Sanskrit meant. Yes, there are still those cultural contexts. Yes, there is still all of that timing and what a word meant then and what it means now and all that kind of stuff. But there was kind of more of a clear, thorough A, B, C, D, E, F, G to follow. So it made it so much easier for me to understand. And having been a yoga teacher for 10 years already, it just kind of was already in my body. I was used to hearing Sanskrit words and stuff. So I started in acupuncture school when I would get really frustrated and feel like I was banging my head against the wall trying to internalize some of the important theory. I found that if I went to my Ayurvedic teacher or I read the Traka Samhita and really studied it, I was starting to figure out what the five phases or the 5 elements really meant in Chinese medicine. What do the meridians really represent? It's very interesting. There's so much crossover, and there are gaps in some of the knowledge in Chinese medicine, such as things about like the Sanjiao, for example, that we can look to Ayurveda and find some valuable information that kind of help fill in those gaps a little bit. In practice, Ayurveda is wonderful because we all are interested in diet. We're all interested in what our constitutional type is because we all want to know more about ourselves. There's nothing, I don't think, more interesting or fascinating than the realm of our existence, what it means to be, and then to specifically understand who we are as an individual in that sphere. And Ayurveda has a lot of really accessible answers to those questions. So I put both together in this book. This book is not a scholarly text that should only be used in an acupuncture school or by a practitioner in the clinic. It's actually quite accessible for anyone. Anyone who's been to acupuncture and wants to know what spleen qi deficiency means or liver qi stagnation, it's in here. Anyone who's been recommended by their practitioner to use a castor oil pack or try oil pulling, it's in here. There's a short, safe, seasonal cleanse in here. There's a constitutional body typing quiz in here. There are guidelines for determining your specific mind-body constitutional type, and from there determining which foods might be best for you, what time to go to sleep, what time to wake up, things like that. So when you read it, I encourage you to use the information and think about yourself, and use the information to ground your energy in what you feel is best for you. So if you determine that you're a Pitta type, although it would be easy to go to the food list, I don't recommend it. I recommend that being a Pitta type, you experiment with food and that you find what feels like it's cooling you down and what feels like it's heating you up. And every day, like our biorhythms shift, our constitution shifts as well. So we're always changing, we're always in flux. So the main thing is to pay attention to who we are and what we feel like in the moment, not just to cravings and things like that, but to what we really feel is best for us, and take those guidelines from in here and use that in our lives. So I think I'm running over a little bit. I just want to read a quote that I've enjoyed since the first time I saw it. It's from the Charaka Samhita. I just have to find where I put it. And then we're going to go to a question and answer section. And then we'll go down and I'll sign some books. Oh, here it is. Page 9. The Charaka Samhita states, "Good health stands at the very root of virtuous acts, acquirement of wealth, gratification of desire, and final emancipation." That's a quote from the Charaka Samhita, which is one of the seminal texts of Ayurvedic medicine. And I'll read it again. "Good health stands at the very root of virtuous acts, acquirement of wealth, gratification of desire, and final emancipation." And I hope that in your life you find all of these things and that this book helps you on your way.